Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us here on our YouTube channel for episode number 915. Well, tonight is the night. If you're watching this on the day it comes out, tonight is the night when they are announcing who wins the National Star Awards at the FFA's 2020 convention. And so this is our last National Star finalist interview that comes or gets released prior to knowing whether or not our guest is a winner. Today, we are speaking with Maddie Fugate. She is coming to us from Iowa State University, but she is from Illinois, and you are not going to believe the passion that she has had for so long for researching biosecurity in the swine industry. It's very, very interesting how a fire can catch and take hold of these young people and what they can do with it. You're going to be blown away with the level of sophistication and experimentation she has done over the last 8 years in the FFA, and her, self-awareness is the right word, of how she looked at her skills, how she looked at her strengths, her weaknesses, and made a very, very good decision on where she would excel the most. And here she has found herself as a National Star finalist. Really exciting to bring this to you. It's episode number 915. We're going to get it started for you right now. Maddie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a blast to be on here.
Good. Well, hey, congratulations on being nominated for a National Star Award. That is a big deal.
Thank you so much. It's been my goal for the 7 years that I've been into FFA. So to see it come into fruition was quite the honor.
Oh, really? Well, that's great. So I always get into the, how long you've been in FFA and everything like that, but we're there already. So you've been in 7 years?
Yes, I started this when I was a freshman in high school, and because of how the books fall, technically I finished my books out January 1st or December 31st of 2019, but I'm a senior now in college. So 7 years of books, 8 years in FFA.
Wow, good for you. Now, you knew at the very outset, the beginning, that you wanted to be a National Star finalist?
Yes, it kind of started with a conversation with my dad that I needed to decide what I wanted to pursue, whether I wanted to try and be a state and maybe even national officer, or if I wanted to try and pursue a star over America. I figured out that I didn't really want to take a gap year in between high school and college, and that's what you do for being an Illinois state officer.
Mm-hmm.
I also didn't know if I exactly maybe had the people skills to be a state officer either, so trying to be a star finalist in agri-science is what I decided to do. I love competition too, so it kind of came naturally that I wanted to compete in other things as well.
Wow. So early on, you set some big goals early on.
Yes, I was taught at a very young age that to share the stars, and even if you miss, then you'll land amongst them, and it turned out well, but they were very lofty, and there were a lot of times where I doubted if it was ever going to happen. But even then, the things that I accomplished along the way were quite a feat as well.
Well, that's awesome. And, you're bringing up a very, very good point about goal setting. And that is, if you achieve every goal that you set for yourself, then you have not set your goals high enough, right? And when you set a really high goal like you have, which is to be a National Star winner, then you look at everything you accomplished along the way, and no matter where you wind up in pursuit of that goal, you look back at everything you've done, and you go, wow, that is a lot, and I would have never done it if I wasn't striving for this one thing.
Yes, and I think in goal setting too, it's so important to not only have a big goal, but also those milestones along the way. And so in FFA, we always had a motto of survive and advance, because there are so many levels that you have to go through just to get to state or nationals.
Mm-hmm.
So by being able to kind of see and hit those milestones and those check marks to at least show the progress and the ultimate goal helped a lot with just the motivation factor and not getting discouraged when things didn't go exactly how you wanted them to.
Wow, that is incredible. Well, I'm airing your episode on the Wednesday that the National Convention begins. So when this comes out, we won't know the end result quite yet, but we'll be just days away. So that is very interesting. Wow, that's a big goal to start out with. Did you have, or I guess, how did you know, or how did you understand what the Stars Over America, the National Star Award, was when you were first beginning?
It wasn't so much I understood it, but I saw them up there on stage, and somebody explained to me that those were the top 4 in the nation in that given area. And I've always strived to be the best at whatever I do, and I put forth my whole heart and never have done anything just halfway. So I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to try and be the best. And the best was the Star Over America. And I had known, because we had several friends who had achieved stars at the state level, kind of what it was. It was an accumulation of what your primary SAE area was. That not only was about your book, but also being able to accurately communicate what you've done and what you've learned in an interview with judges, and then as well with friends along the way too that you meet. And so I was like, well, that kind of seems fitting. I enjoy being organized. So that was the record keeping aspect of it. And I enjoy talking and then the competing too. And so I was like, oh, that's something I want to do. And then I went to my very first convention, actually my freshman year of high school, and it was very overwhelming. But I remember sitting there and watching those stars get chosen, and the smoke and just the show and the lights and the lasers. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I went back and I told my dad, and he's like, okay, so no more state officer, no more aiming for national officer. We'll put everything that we can into trying to make you a Star Over America. And it happened. And it was the email that we had been waiting for 7 years, but we didn't really know it at the time.
That is exciting. Wow, that is really cool. Okay, so tell me about your dad. Is your dad, I mean, the way you're describing your dad, I'm getting this gut feeling that he's an FFA advisor, but I don't know if I'm right about that.
He is not my FFA advisor, but him and my mom have been my biggest cheerleaders throughout all of this, and have really made for sure that my dreams were in reach. And he took my dream, helped make it his own, and has been with me every step of the way. In fact, he actually drove out to Ames, Iowa, where I'm at school, when we did the interview, so he could kind of help calm my nerves. And like I said, it's been 7 years, and we wanted to make for sure that we saw it through. And he's just been great throughout it, and really has helped so much. And my mom too. I mean, she kind of keeps us within a reality check when we start going off on tangents or maybe doing things and overthinking things. She's like, guys, come on, you're making this way too hard. So they're both very instrumental in anything that we do.
Okay. And so you got notified that you were one of the 4 by email. Is that right?
Well, so we got the email a couple days after the state advisor and executive FFA person in Illinois had called me. And actually, I missed her call because I was out working pigs in the barn, and my mom was gone and my dad was downstairs. And I was like, this is either really good or really bad, because we'd always kind of, it was the first week of August, and we'd know that that's kind of when things start happening for national FFA, whether that be you find out you're a national proficiency finalist, a national agri-science finalist, or a national star finalist. And we'd had to wait for that second week in August, several years for agri-science. We're almost always at State Fair when it happens. Well, since State Fair didn't happen this year, we weren't kind of off in our timing because we didn't have that usual gauge. So she called me. I missed the call. I started walking towards the house thinking this is either really, really good or really, really bad. Either I made it or I did it. And I really did not know which one it was going to be. And so I called her back, and I went downstairs and I told my dad, and just the joy that broke out in between both of us because we had finally accomplished what we had set out for and hoped to do. It's something I'll remember forever.
That's cool. Man, that is great. Okay, so we're in 8 years in FFA now. You're at Iowa State in your senior year, and what are you majoring in? What are your degree in?
I'm an agricultural business major, but before I came to Iowa State, I actually was at Lakeland College in Mattoon, Illinois. I judge livestock and have for, 13 or 14 years now. So I kind of went the junior college route, judged livestock, and then came here to Iowa State, and I'm still a member of the livestock judging team. Okay.
And your high school was, am I saying it right, Mahomet Seymour? Am I saying it correctly?
You're close. Mahomet Seymour FFA in high school, yes.
And what part of Illinois is Mahomet in?
It is just 10 minutes outside of Champaign, where the University of Illinois is located at, so East Central Illinois. Okay.
So that's interesting. What caused you to leave the state and go to Iowa State versus going 10 minutes down the road?
Well, I'd always been a huge Illini fan growing up, and if you would have asked me when I was 10 years old, I could have told you that I was going to go to the University of Illinois and I was going to lead the Orange Crush. But as I started looking at colleges, it just didn't feel like college since it was so close to home. And and I wanted to kind of spread my wings, get away from the nest a little bit more than I had in junior college. And I visited Iowa State actually in my junior year of high school, and it kind of just come back to that feeling of home. And just where I ended up from there, and it's been a great decision.
Okay, very good. Now, tell me about home in Mahomet. So, do you raise pigs at home?
Yes. So for, oh gosh, this is going to test my math. Almost 19 years now, we have shown and exhibited pigs across the United States through NGSA and Team Purebred, the National Junior Swine Association. And then we have varied in our sow numbers anywhere from 20 at the most to now we are down to 11 sows and 1 gilt. And they're all land races. So we're a very niche breed operation.
Okay.
But we show anything and everything that we can kind of get our hands on. We've shown at every single NGSA and Team Purebred national, regional, and sanctioned show as well.
Wow. So, I mean, that sounds busy.
It is. We love it. I don't know if I've ever met 3 people who love livestock showing more than my family does. We'll travel from California, Arizona, all the way up to Hamburg, New York, which is about 45 minutes from Niagara Falls, over to Timonium, Maryland, which is right on the East Coast, and even down to Perry, Georgia, to go to a show. So especially this year, if there's a show, we're most likely at it. I've learned never to take an opportunity to show for granted.
Wow. And is it just the 3 of you, mom and dad, or do you have any brothers and sisters?
I am the only child, so every resource has kind of been put into me, and it makes it kind of nice for traveling because I get the entire back seat and don't have to share with anybody.
I'm an only child as well. So is my daughter. So I totally get it. That is great. Well, good for you. And how wonderful that your parents can do that with you, and you guys can kind of be this team to help you develop. That's great.
Yeah, growing up in high school, I was always involved in a lot of different things. So when we sat down in the truck to go to a show, it was kind of like the mobile living room, and we were all held captive. So not as much sleeping as I probably would have liked, but it was a good chance to catch up. And like I said, I was held captive, so they kind of had to make me talk. Okay.
Now, when you were beginning in FFA, you had thoughts of being a national officer. That later changed. But along that path while you were in high school, did you serve as a chapter officer as you were kind of pushing in that direction?
Yes, I did serve as a chapter officer for all 3 years that I could. And I ran for, in Illinois, our next level would be sections. Unfortunately, I didn't get a section office, but I did try for 2 years, just wasn't in the cards for me.
What were your officer positions in your chapter?
I was reporter, secretary, and treasurer.
Okay, really cool. Man, that is great. Well, I'm assuming, how many FFA advisors did you have there at Mahomet?
Just one.
Just one? Let's acknowledge that person. I'm sure they've been a help along the way. Who's that been?
Miss Jennifer Worley is her name.
Awesome. Well, thank you for mentioning her. I'm going to take a quick second, Maddie, and mention our sponsors that make this show possible. And everybody, of course, I want to talk about Powder River Livestock Handling Equipment, the absolute finest in large livestock handling equipment, squeeze chutes, calf tables, runways, sweep tubs, whatever you need to handle your cattle. Powder River makes it. They've designed it well for over 80 years now out here in the West with some of the most difficult to handle cattle we have. And now they are everywhere, and they are available to you with the same quality of equipment. We've got a Powder River squeeze chute and their livestock panels here on our farm in Idaho for our cattle, and we want you to do the same. You can find them at powderriver.com, and let your local farm and ranch retailer know you want to see that Powder River green out in their sales yard. And then, of course, Lacrosse footwear, Lacrosse rubber boots. Man, I could not be happier with Lacrosse as a sponsor, as a historic company, and as a manufacturer of boots. I'm so happy to have found their Alpha Range boot. I use them every single day of the year here on our farm, whether I'm irrigating in the summer or I'm out feeding in the winter, and we want you to have the same great experience that I get to have every single day. And love to talk about Lacrosse when we do our FFA episodes because they are such a proud sponsor of the FFA with $25,000 in both scholarships and jackets as part of the Give the Gift of Blue program every single year. So please check them out. You can find them over at lacrossefootwear.com. All right, Maddie, let's talk about your supervised ag experience. So I know that we kind of talked off the air that it's difficult to pin it down and put one title on it because you've done so many things. And I think that, when you get to this level, I think that's how it looks because you've had a lot of interest and you've tried a lot of things. So explain to us, I guess, the origins of it and how it's developed over time.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I've shown pigs for as long as I can remember and raised them equally as long. Both of my parents grew up showing pigs and raising pigs too. It's, I think, six generations on one side of my family having pigs. So, pigs was always in the equation for me. And with that, I always went on farms to look at baby pigs, judging too. I've done it forever. And we put on plastic boots. And it's just booting up part standard procedure. And I never really understood it. I mean, I took the PQA classes. I know what biosecurity is. I know how to try and mitigate it, especially when we go to shows. But I started my FFA career in 2013, which coincidentally also happens to be when the PEDV, or porcine epidemic diarrhea outbreak, broke out. And my father is involved in animal pharmaceuticals as well as my mom. And one day we were driving along and a veterinarian called my dad. And he was talking about how he was really struggling to have practical and yet still effective biosecurity protocols that were user friendly for not only his workers, but also truck drivers. And that there were so many recommendations out there for trucks and vectors of biosecurity for PEDV, but none of them were really practical for on-farm use. They weren't real life oriented.
Okay.
So I didn't really know what a vector was at the time. And I piped up and I was like, what's this vector? I know what this virus is that you guys are talking about. I understand the PEDV aspect of it. Didn't know, though, the technical term for vector, which is just a method of transmission, whether that be pigs, oral, feces, trucks, humans, wildlife. There's tons of them. And so they were explaining it to me, and I had seen the agri-science fair when I went to convention. And I thought it was interesting because I always loved science in school, because we got to have labs and we got more hands-on experience versus just taking tests. So I kind of had wanted to do it, but I never knew what exactly I had wanted to do. I looked up several different animal-related, livestock-related studies, but they all were very canned from Google, and it just was not who I was and wanted to do. And so through talking with that veterinarian, Dr. Pat Graham, and my dad as well, we figured out that I could probably do a agri-science fair study based off truck tires and PEDV. Now, when you're 13 turning 14 and trying to convince your parents that you need to find live PED virus when you raise pigs was a little bit of an interesting conversation, but we did get it done. We ended up actually doing the study, not at my home place, obviously, but at my grandparents' farm, which is several miles from any type of pig operation. And we ended up burning our clothes and our shoes because we did not want to transmit that virus back. And we actually got, my mom's requirement was 2. And so we went one beyond that, truck washes on the way home, and sprayed our tires with disinfectant that I was actually testing. But that's how I got into it, was the PEDV. And throughout my then 7 different research projects, I have used PEDV as kind of a model for biosecurity and how we can then mimic that. And with other diseases, like I said, I got into it at the right time, unfortunately, with the PED virus, but it worked out well for me because I've been able to use that to kind of see how biosecurity works. And then I actually branched out off of the animal systems category and into integrated systems, and looked in 2015 after that onset of the PED virus and after we were through really the heat of the pandemic. What was it like? How had biosecurity protocols strengthened after PEDV, and also just producer and worker morale and kind of the mental health aspect of that. So that was really interesting to look at and see that those biosecurity protocols had strengthened, and that some of the main concerns of the PEDV was not only the baby piglets dying, but just the worker morale of that. And hearing people talk about those stories was a little disheartening at first.
That is really interesting, and it's not an aspect that I would have thought of, but you're absolutely right that if you work on a pig operation and you like pigs and they're dying left and right, that is, every day's a bad day.
It is, and especially when they talk about just that feeling of anxiety with the ticking time bomb, that when somebody close to you gets it, it's only a matter of time, and how can you prevent that? And what I found very intriguing was the bioassay feedback when they would have a break in farrowing, actually choosing to self-infect with PEDV to try and minimize the amount of loss that they would have in their herd, because they did have that break. And that was something I would never think about. But in the world that we live in now, it seems like it may be effective.
Okay, that's interesting. So what you're saying is when they were not farrowing, they were purposely exposing the sows to PEDV so they would build immunity and pass that immunity along to the pigs when they did farrow? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So PEDV is lethal to pigs that are still on the sows. So once you kind of get them past that 21-day-old, and the older they are when they get it, the better. Yes, it will take them off feed for a little bit, but it won't kill them. It really does slough the villi off at a baby pig and essentially dehydrates them to death because of they're still consuming milk and don't really have that other avenue of nutrition as feed.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they didn't have baby pigs that were on the sows and they were in a break and farrowing, by self-infecting those sows, they could really minimize then their loss. Their like older pigs and their sows may go off feed for a little bit, but they weren't going to lose them. They were just going to be more inefficient.
Okay. And the purpose for doing this is, would it pass along some immunity to the next litter of pigs?
Yes. And kind of like COVID, once you had PEDV, you were immune for a while and you had those antibodies built up. So then they wouldn't have to worry about, oh, my neighbor got it. When am I going to get it? Do I have a bunch of baby pigs on the ground now? They were controlling their circumstances.
Wow. Okay. So let's go back to your initial experiment. You initially wanted to experiment with the virus. You did it at your grandparents' farm. How does one go about getting live virus?
Have connections with veterinarians is what I learned. Some of the vets that I worked with, some of the farms that they oversaw did have PED virus. So we got some feces from there. And what I tested was the effectiveness of different cleansing, the effectiveness of different models of biosecurity on truck tires. So that was my very first study, and it was looking at the use of washing a tire, washing and disinfecting a tire, or just disinfecting a tire, and then I had a control, and seeing was disinfectant actually working if it was just sprayed onto a feces? Was it more effective if you washed it with a high-powered hose first and then sprayed disinfectant, or was just washing it with a hose effective? And the reason I was studying this versus some other methods was at the time it had not really been studied a lot, was just how can we try and mitigate risk when it comes to on-farm trucks, but also that it's pretty easy to put a sprayer out by the road with disinfectant in it and say, please spray your tires and then wait 5 minutes before coming onto our farm. Versus saying, hey, can we bake your truck to 160 degrees to kill any virus that you may have picked up along the way?
Wow. Okay. So when this was happening, you're right. This is very similar to right now with COVID. When this was happening, people were coming up with solutions. Do this before you come onto the farm. And it made logical sense. It made sense in their head. But you're the person who stepped in and said, okay, you've come up with a solution. Now I want to see if it really works.
And yes, a lot of it was trying to figure out what was applicable to the real world, but still I could try and learn things from and test my knowledge through an agri-science standpoint as well. So I always wanted to make for sure that whatever I was doing, I could go out and share with producers, or I could implement on my own farm. And so if it wasn't practical to do in my little farm, then it wasn't practical for larger producers to do as well. And that's kind of how I measured the effectiveness of, is what I'm doing applicable or not? But past that, then, like I said, I was able to conduct surveys with producers looking at their biosecurity protocols. And I did find that our protocols were extremely laxed in the United States. And then after PEDV, our protocols went up tenfold nearly. And I kind of think that's similar to how we don't think of a mask as like a commonplace, but if you go across seas when somebody has a cold or something, they wear a mask. And so it was very interesting to be able to actually interview and compete for Star Over America this year, because all of my research has been within the biosecurity realm. And that's essentially what we're dealing with today is biosecurity, but on a human sense. And if you would have told me in 2013 that the concepts I was learning of herd immunity, biosecurity, vectors, and all that would be almost everyday verbiage in 2020, 7 years later, I don't think I would have believed anybody. Wow.
Okay. So your story is so interesting for so many reasons, but I want to go back to the beginning. So I have had the opportunity over the years to interview a lot of people who have been involved in agri-science research projects. And people in the community, people in that particular niche of research or science, they want to help. They want to be there. They want to see you succeed. They want to encourage you to be the next generation to come along and deal with these problems. But in your case, yes, they're motivated to do that. But now they're talking. How old were you when you first started with the live virus?
I would have been 14, turning 15. It would have been my freshman year of high school.
Okay, so now they're talking to a person who's been on this earth for 14 years, and you want to do an experiment, and you want them to help you put this into play, an experiment where if you're irresponsible with it, if you don't take the precautions you need to, if you're not as serious as you say you are, this could be devastating to a farm. It could be devastating to a series of farms, or even to an entire industry if this virus gets spread around because of reckless or careless handling. So not only did they want to help you, but as a 14-year-old, you had to convince these people, oh no, I am dead serious about being very safe with this, and I will not get you or anybody else in a position where they lose their farm, their livelihood, their business, or get into some sort of trouble. I mean, that's a tall order. How did you convince them that they could trust you at that young age?
Well, part of it was finding a location that was set away from swine farms. So like I said, I didn't want to do it on our home place because we have pigs.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to find a place that was set away from farms a little bit, so that way there wasn't a chance of, oh, the wind catches it. And then I had to deal a lot with cross-contamination too, and just ensuring that everything that we did, it got burned or it got properly disposed of. So actually there's still some PEDV feces in my grandparents' freezer, because that's one way to contain the virus, is just to freeze it back. So they will never see the light of day. That will never again. It's in their basement, deep freeze, and it won't come out until there's a proper way to either dispose of it or a good way for us to kill that virus, other than just baking it to 160 degrees, because nobody really wants to put crap in their oven. But the veterinarians that I was working with, they were very eager to try and help, because they could tell that I really did want to do something and that I was passionate about livestock. And I think that's one thing that goes a long way, especially when I was younger, is being able to communicate my passion, and that I wasn't trying just to do this for some agri-science or project, but I was trying to do this because I saw the industry that I loved was plagued by some issue. And if I could maybe come up with a small solution, then I could be doing my part in some way.
Okay. So when you first started, how did you detect whether or not virus was still there after your different methods?
I used PCR testing. So PCR, polymerase chain reaction, is measured in CTs, or cycle times. And I was using a swabbing method that was developed by Dr. Jim Lowe over at the University of Illinois, when he was swabbing market trucks at different locations across the state. And so what I did was I would soak a gauze pad in 15 milliliters of either buffer solution or saline solution, depending on which year I was doing my study. And then I would swipe the gauze pad along the tire, and then wring that liquid back out and transfer that into a Falcon tube to be sent to Iowa State University for PCR testing. And we actually, before we even could begin my study, had to ensure that there was virus in the feces that we received. So we had to do a first initial test of that. And then we did several other different swabbings throughout, while rotating each of our treatments to make sure that if cross-contamination or was in play, that it was all varied. So there wasn't that chance of like, oh, because she always had her control to the west and the wind was blowing downwind, that there wasn't a chance of virus. So really making for sure that all those fine details were hammered out. At first, I thought that we were insane with every single rep that we did. We would record the temperature, the wind speed, and the humidity. And I was like, why are we doing this? And then I realized afterwards, one of the veterinarians was explaining how important it is to know all those fine details, because those can play a part in your study. Luckily in mine, it really didn't, because it varied so little. But we also had different levels of biosecurity, which was hard to explain to my grandparents at first. They were my very first technicians or research assistants with me and assisting me in this. And so I actually had to create a baseball diamond like diagram to show them that, hey, you need to stay in this certain area. Like, you're either the low biosecurity person or the mid biosecurity person, and you can't cross those lines because otherwise you could contaminate or affect the study. And so that was a little hard at first, but once we kind of got that visual in their minds, it became easier. And then I was the highest biosecurity person in a Tyvek suit, gloves, boots, mask, goggles, you name it. I had it on, and I had to disinfect myself after every single treatment, not just every single rep, change my gloves. I learned the proper way to change gloves, which I did not know that there was a proper way, but I do now.
Mm-hmm.
And take off my boots, Purell my entire body, or use disinfectant to spray me down to ensure that I was not then the source of contaminating if there was no virus on a truck tire.
Wow. Okay. So now your findings, have they had an impact in the industry?
I have been lucky enough that some farms have chosen to replicate some of my protocols and asked me for input on some of their biosecurity protocols. And then I did use my own protocols that I had found with using disinfectant on my own farm. So I would say that it's been pretty successful in what I've done, and I'm happy with the results.
Wow, that is fantastic. My goodness. Okay. So Maddie, you're majoring in ag business. So where is all this headed?
That's a good question. I'm hoping to go to grad school and then get a job in either at the university level or in industry. And why I chose ag business is when I was doing all my research, and I've had 7 different projects that have varied, but they all dealt with swine producers and veterinarians. And hearing different swine producers talk about the economic impact that biosecurity and getting diseases had on their farm, because we're in a business, and that's what it is. It's a business. Mm-hmm. And ultimately that does affect bottom line. And just hearing them talk about that was something that I never really thought about, that, okay, yeah, you lose a pig, but not only are you losing a pig, you're losing maybe the ability between breaking even and not. Mm-hmm. And so that led me to ag business. And I'm hoping to go to grad school and look at a study that is looking at the economic impact of herd health, because I feel like that's a side that not a lot of people think about. We think about the biosecurity protocols and we want to keep the disease off of our farm, but how does that affect us if it does get on our farms?
Wow. Okay. And when you say grad school, are you looking at a master's degree or are you looking at a PhD right now?
Master's right now with the potential for a PhD, kind of just taking it one step at a time.
Well, that's great. Good for you. That is phenomenal. Maddie, your story is incredible, and what you've done is incredible. I want to ask a piece of advice. There's something you said in the interview that really stood out to me, and I think it's really important for anybody coming behind you, or even people who are ahead of you in life. When I mean ahead, I just mean advanced in age. But for anybody to hear, but especially for FFA students who are going to be coming behind you, they're going to be looking at you, seeing that you're a star finalist, possibly a star winner, and really looking at your example. You, early on in your FFA career, you did a very honest assessment of your strengths and weaknesses. And you went, I want to achieve something at a high level, and I've got to be very honest with myself about where my strengths lie and where my weaknesses lie. And then you made your decision, and that has worked because you are now one of 4 of the top of over 700,000 students. So that has absolutely worked no matter what happens in the next day or two during the national convention. What advice do you have for a student who wants to achieve at a high level on how they can go about being very honest with themselves about where their strengths and their weaknesses lie?
It's kind of funny you asked that, because I realized very early on in my FFA career that I definitely had a lot of weaknesses. And I found that out during my first CDE that I did, which was forestry, and I got second to last, if not dead last. And I got a 0 on tree ID for something that I had actually studied for. And I went home and I said, forestry is not for me. I knew, though, that I wanted to compete in public speaking and extemporaneous and creed. Just because I had naturally always done public speaking through our junior associations, and I loved giving speeches and being able to share what I had learned through speaking. And so I knew that that was kind of one of my strengths after I learned that forestry was one of my weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And so being able to try different things and learn, honestly, I was not expecting that I was going to get really close to last, if not last, in forestry. Like, I had actually studied for it. I thought I could do decent, and it just comes easier to some. So I would just say, like, don't try and force things, that there are things that are just going to come more naturally. And there's so many opportunities within the FFA that there's going to be something for you. And yes, it might take a lot of trial and error. I was kind of lucky because one of the very first things I tried was one of the things that I was very bad at. Mm-hmm. And so I then went on, I did not do soils because I thought soils was a little close to forestry. And I'm very glad I didn't, because after hearing some of our members come back and talk about it, I can definitely say I was also not going to be good at soils. And then after that would have been creed speaking. And that was something that I enjoyed doing because we not only got to learn it in the classroom, so I didn't really have to take time outside the classroom to memorize it because it was actually an assignment for us, but then just be able to have something that was already wrote for you and you were said, hey, memorize these 5 paragraphs word for word, and then that's your competition. It was pretty cut and dry. And I ended up doing fairly well at it. I was 3rd in our section. And so my trial and error was minimized because I did fail right off the very bat. Like, the first thing I tried in FFA, I failed epically at. But I was like, okay, really, I've never been around forestry. We have a couple trees in our yard, and there's a timber by my grandparents' house, but that was my extent of trees. And so learning that you're going to have those strengths and you're going to have those weaknesses, and not to get discouraged by things, and just kind of assess it like you would your knowledge for a test or anything like that. Where can you improve at? Where do you think you excel in? And then go from there. And I would suggest looking at all the different CDEs that FFA does offer, and maybe choosing a couple ones, because if you do try and do all of them right off the bat, you can get pretty burnt out because there are so many different ones. But I guarantee that there is something that piques everybody's interest.
That's great. Great advice. Has there been a National Star finalist from your chapter before?
I do not believe so. I'm not 100% sure, though. I do know we have had a couple of people who have gone on to get their American degrees, but I'm not for sure if in the past, since before I can remember, that there have been. But I do know that in the past 15 years, there has not. Okay.
So what's it going to mean to your chapter, your hometown, and of course your family for you if you bring home that National Star Award?
I think it would mean a lot. It's been a very long journey, and I know that for my family and I, it's kind of the end of an era. We always joke that we had our FFA time, and it was when there was a card table out downstairs and there was paper scattered everywhere, multiple computers, and my mom would have to yell at my dad and I to come to dinner, or, hey, don't forget you need to do this, or, Maddie, you have XYZ to still do tonight. And we kind of got into that zone. And so not going home ever and seeing that card table out again with multiple different books spread across it and having to do different practice interviews, it's definitely different. The amount of practice interviews through FFA that I did, not only for my proficiencies, but then for State Star, it was a lot. And knowing that I don't have to go through that again and come up with that 2 to 3 minute intro that tries to accurately summarize everything while still showcasing personality, but doesn't go too long, which was always extremely hard. It's going to be weird knowing that that's over with, but at the same time, it's been great years in FFA, and I've been so blessed with whatever I've been able to do, but none of it would have been possible without my support system. So this is it for us, but it's been a good ride.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations to you. You've already accomplished tons. And best of luck to you as well with the National Convention and seeing how it all shakes out. But, man, you've done so much. It's been a thrill and an honor to speak with you. So happy to meet you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, everybody. Special thanks to Maddie Fugate for coming on and sharing all that great information with us, that great story. And, hey, as always, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.